Greetings, everybody. I think we can start for the week. Hope you guys are doing well. We are here right at the end of the semester. It's probably been quite a long year, lots of hard work. So I think we are all starting to maybe feel the jaggedness, the tiredness, but still a little bit more to do. Got your exams coming up, and I hope you guys are feeling energized and ready for that. Speaking of your exams, on the 6th of November at 6 o'clock. So in this time slot now, actually, I think it is a week from today, if my calendar maths is correct. We are offering the NSS, the National Support Workshop for this module. Me, the module leader, Oriel, and I will go over the portfolio of evidence that you guys have to hand in for your summative. So make time to attend that. If you can't make it, look out for the recording because we will share that too. It will probably be something like half an hour long on the 6th at 6. If you do attend, bring some questions. If you have anything, that will be the time you can ask. I think I've gone over the POE with some of my other students. So if you have questions now, you can ask them, and I guess I'll just hope I don't contradict anything we then say later on. But you can ask me now tonight if you wish to. I'll leave some time open for that, just in case you want to know anything. And most definitely, please start working on it now. Perhaps you have already. Don't wait for us to give you instructions or clarity. Get started, get cracking, because it can take quite a while to do this. I think as you would have experienced in your first semester with the POE, everything takes you a little bit longer than you planned for, right? So make sure you go over, make sure you're working now. That also lead you to have some questions that you can bring to the NSS next week, November 6th at 6. Okay, so the other little bit of housekeeping I wanted to bring up was that I think as of now, your ICE marks should be available for you to check and see. Sorry about the delay. I sent through the marks a week ago, but nobody realized that I wasn't properly on the administrative system we use to verify the marks. So it was all stuck in limbo and nobody really knew it. So sorry for the delay, but the marks should be available for you to look at as of today, I think. Either today or tomorrow. So if you're stressed or worried about that, worry no more because the marks are ready. So that'll give you 10% of your final mark. If you add that to the mark you got for part 1, you're able to work out more or less where you sit for the whole semester and what you might need for the POE as a final mark in order to pass or get a mark that you have a goal for, like a distinction or something like that. So it's good to know in your CAS, continuous assessment, what marks you have ended up with for the time being. Okay, so let's get into the actual book. My goal this evening is to try and finish the book so we can get to the end, which I think we will. The book is a very pacey one. It's fairly easy and straightforward to read. And it really, about halfway through the book, begins to pick up pace and take on its overall kind of narrative shape. And it really quickly accelerates to, I think, something of a surprising ending. Because the book, as I've been saying a lot, starts off as a genre book. In other words, it's working within a particular conventional narrative story. And in this one, it sets itself up to be a murder mystery story. We've got a in this case a dog. Usually it's a person, but in this case it's a dog that's been murdered, quote unquote. And we have a detective, Christopher, who's determined to solve the mystery. And that's kind of the promise of the book, just as it would be in any detective story. We've got an injustice, something that has happened, and by the end of the story, we will know who the killer is. They will be named. They will face punishment or judgment for their actions. And so the whole thing will tie up nice and neatly, conclusively, at a kind of happy ending, right? That's usually the promise that we get from a genre story. That's different from how real life works. But that's one of the reasons why we read, because we get books and movies and TV shows are able to deliver us the satisfaction that life often denies us with its messy, inconclusive, or ambiguous endings. Okay, so that's been the promise of the book so far, is that we're going to get this nice, tidy, happy ending. But things do not progress that way at all, right? The book is very unconventional, as I've been saying a lot. It uses a lot of postmodern tricks and tips. In my last recording, I covered this difference between content and form, and how Mark Haddon, the author, uses form as a way constantly to kind of upend your expectations as a reader. He always likes to show you the contingency of the text that you are reading. In other words, that the thing you are reading is a creation. It's made by somebody. In this case, it's made by the character, and the character, of course, is made by the author. And so there's a whole kind of in an abstract philosophical sense, the book is questioning the nature of truth and reality, and shows us how very often a writer will hide away their form, will use form, but keep it hidden away so as to enchant you, trick you into enjoying and believing the reality of their story. Here, Haddon is often doing the opposite. He's using these unconventional forms, showing us the forms very often, and in so doing is giving us, in a way, the bigger truth, which is that the thing we are holding in our hands is merely just a perspective. It's a story. It's a creation, right? And that complicates our understanding of truth and reality as we read the book. That's what makes it postmodern. And about halfway through the book, it really is about halfway through the story or so, there's a twist in the story. Usually, in a detective story, there's like a red herring, some deception. The author leads you to expect one thing but delivers you another, and that is a twist in the story. There's a revelation. Something you didn't see coming suddenly happens, and indeed that occurs in the story too, except maybe it's not what you would expect or maybe even want as a reader, because about halfway through the story, Christopher discovers that he actually solves both of the two mysteries that have been going on in the book so far. The one mystery is who killed the dog, who killed Wellington, the dog. And the second mystery was what happened to his mother, because he thinks his mother died, but the way he explains it to us is very piecemeal, very kind of inconclusive. It doesn't seem realistic that his mother has died, because we don't know what she died of. The circumstances of her death are quite mysterious, and it doesn't really add up. So there's been a bit of a red flag there about his mother's death. And so we discover both of these two mysteries get solved kind of almost together, because for one thing, Christopher discovers after, so what happens is that he's been writing this book, and the book is the book we are holding in our hands and reading. And in the story, his dad discovers that he's been writing this book and basically confiscates it from him and says he's not allowed to do this. He's not allowed to poke his nose into other people's business, and then he must stop writing, and he's confiscating the book, and he pretends to throw it away. Okay, so again, there's another kind of funny thing happening there, which is that we are, as a reader, once again, aware that the text we are holding in our hands is a text, is a book. It's something that somebody wrote, but it's also getting thrown away. But we also have the complete finished book in our hands. So we know that that isn't going to be the end of the story. Something else is going to happen. But again, we're always just a little bit aware, self-aware of ourselves as holding something that is a text, is a narration, is a medium that we are being given by somebody else. So a little bit of like murkiness between reality and fiction begins to be played around with here. And that's kind of a curious thing in the book, is that the book is always so interested in what is true and what is real, But all the time, Haddon is giving us all these ways in which the book is revealed not to be true and real. So you have this tension where the mystery is actually solved, the answer is given to us at the same time as the very reality or truthfulness of the book is under scrutiny and in question. And here, what happens is that in the story, his dad doesn't actually throw it away. He hides it away in his cupboard. And Christopher, because he's clever and sneaky, he's able to find the book in his dad's cupboard. And at the same time, he uncovers all of these letters. And on the letters is his name and his address. And here now the book becomes completely different. It actually changes, because this leads Christopher to work out and discover that his mother is not dead. She's actually alive and well. She's living in London, and she's been sending him all of these letters that his father has kept hidden from him, instead telling him that his mother is dead. So that's a big sudden shift in the book. And even I was kind of like shocked and surprised at this twist that had happened, because I didn't really see it coming. Usually I'm good at this sort of thing, remembering, picking up on possibilities the writer can follow and having it in my mind as a model of what could possibly happen in the story ahead. And I actually I didn't see this one coming. It kind of tricked me, I will admit. And I've even read the book before, like long ago, maybe 15 or 16 years ago, and I still got tricked. I got tricked for a second time. So it kind of shows you that it works. So Christopher has this revelation, and he has accidentally solved this mystery about his mother. She is alive, she's well, and she's actually communicating with him. This, of course, leads to another confrontation with his father, and it's at this point, I think it might be at this point, or maybe a few pages before anyway, that his father also admits that it was he who killed the dog. It was he who killed Wellington. And the reason for this is because after Christopher's mother left, right, so she's left. She didn't get kicked out the house or anything. She made the choice to leave Christopher, because she basically could not deal with the pressure and the strain, the difficulty of raising him anymore. So she left. She couldn't do it. And and she left with the neighbor. So she was having an affair with Roger, Mr. Shears, who was the owner of Wellington. And basically, to be broad, Christopher's dad killed the dog kind of out of revenge and out of a sense of anger at what had happened to him, because his wife had left with Wellington's owner to go live in London and left him all alone to pick up the pieces and try and be a single parent raising this boy with autism, right? So both of the mysteries suddenly, not even halfway through the book, are solved. We know what happened to his mom. We know what happened to Wellington. So now we're holding in our hands a book that has suddenly changed right beneath our noses, because we were kind of promised this piece of genre fiction, and the mystery is only supposed to be solved at the end of the story, not in the middle. What's going to happen after the mystery is solved? And that's something that murder mysteries never actually deal with, is what happens in the aftermath of something coming to an end. They end with the killer being brought to justice or the robber being caught or whatever. But what about what's happening in the world the week after or a year after? What's happening to the people who were affected? What happened to them? Were they traumatized? Did they ever get over it? Were they satisfied by the conclusion of the killer being caught? That kind of more human, difficult, ambiguous stuff is not the stuff of genre stories. That's the stuff of other kind of stories. And so now suddenly the book has changed into something a bit more serious and a bit more realistic. And it's actually switched genres, I would say, right? Because for a brief time, the book actually becomes, here you can see I've used the word at the bottom of the slide, an epistolary novel, Okay. An epistolary novel is, you might recognize the spelling there, Epist. It's got the same kind of spelling as the word epistle, which means a letter. So suddenly the book becomes a novel made out of letters, which is what an epistolary novel is. It's a novel told in the form of letters. And I'm not going to give you a whole long history here of literature, but when the novel kind of first emerged in as a popular form back in the 1800s, it was very frequently written by characters in the form of letters, because letters was the main way people communicated back then, right? And what is a letter? You know, it's a piece of writing that in which one person talks to another single person usually. And letters are also a great place for a character within a story to explain something, to kind of give you exposition, to let another character know what's going on, or to explain what's going on in their heart of hearts, or psychologically to offer up some kind of a revelation. So letters in novels are very frequently used device as a means to reveal, to explain, but also to show something psychological, right? Here, those things are all going to be happening in this section of the book, because we actually get to see and read the letters that Christopher's mother has sent him. And in these letters, she explains to him why she left, where she lives now, what's going on, and indeed invites him to seek her out when he wants to, right? So it advances the story, but it also puts us in new territory and new terrain as the reader, because now it's like the story has expanded outwards and it's suddenly become something else, right? It's almost like we're in a different genre. I was also, when I was reading this and then I taught it to another class, I was thinking, you know, the story was published in 2003, so written, I don't know, maybe 2002, 2001. Back in the days before, obviously, the internet was so widespread as a means of communication. This would have been a time when some people had email, but not that many people were using it. And nobody really had mobile devices, smartphones. We didn't have WhatsApp. We didn't have social media. And this was just about the time when people still would have written each other letters. It kind of would have been, I don't know, fairly common, or something I still would do in like school. They'd make us do projects where we write a letter to somebody living in New Zealand or something for fun, to see how the postal services worked, or in our case didn't work. And so this is kind of like, I guess it's just about realistic enough, but I also thought that if you were to set the story today in 2024, this whole mystery would not have happened, because people would just have had WhatsApp and Instagram. And Christopher would have easily found out pretty quickly where his mother was and what she was up to and what exactly happened. So the novel of letters is the thing that's kind of fallen away as a form, because we no longer use letters as a medium of communication. So this kind of feels even more as a genre, as a medium, even more removed from us now as a reader than it did relatively recently. And that increases the meta-fictional sense the book is giving us here. So that's another rather big word I've used there, meta-fiction. Meta-fiction just means, it's a fancy way of saying, meta means like big, okay, but it can also mean like above. So it's something that is at a remove from something else. It's above it, it's transcended it. And meta-fiction is fiction, narrative, storytelling that is aware of itself as being fictional. Okay, so postmodern, basically. I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. That postmodern fiction is fiction that is aware, self-aware of itself as being, you know, a text, a take, a perspective, not the capital T truth, but rather something more complicated than just a kind of easy claim that you make about how the world is. I heard somebody say yesterday on a YouTube video I was watching that the truth is not a solid thing. The truth is not a solid. Actually, it's a liquid. So don't see it as a solid. See it as a liquid. It's something that's malleable, and it changes, and it's hard to grasp in your hands. It's hard to hold in your hands for any amount of time because it will just slip through your fingers. And that's what the truth is. It's a slippery thing. It's hard to get. It's hard to keep hold of. And sometimes I think we get complacent and very relaxed about what we think is real and what we think is true. It's actually really hard to arrive at the truth. And we are happy sometimes for people just to tell us something, or happy just to read something or see something and accept what we see at a surface value, at a surface level, at face value, as being true and all there is to see, and that's that. Actually, and this is the great power of novels in particular, is that novels will peel back the surface layer of things and show us how underneath that is all of this complexity, unpredictability, that seeing something more deeply and really thinking about it actually reveals that what you've seen is completely different to what you thought you were seeing the first time, right? Things are more tumultuous underneath the surface. Things are different. They're surprising. They're never quite as you thought they were. And this book is like that too, is that it slowly begins to peel back the surface layers of things and shows you underneath the hood what is actually going on and how complicated and difficult and unsatisfying in a way all of that revelation is. And one way Haddon gets you there is first by kind of giving you a nice, cozy, comfortable little detective story, gets you engaged and involved. Then he starts playing these little tricks on you, these meta-fictional tricks to complicate your understanding of truth and reality. And then by the end of the story, you've realized that actually you've seen something that's really quite tragic and sad and complicated, and the problems of it are kind of insoluble. You can't really solve them, as I'll show you soon. Then the book, actually as it proceeds, turns into a different genre of story too, which is that it becomes a coming-of-age novel. Because what Christopher decides to do is, because his dad is, in his eyes now, like a bad guy and maybe even dangerous, he wants to escape. And he wants to go to his mother in London. The only way he can do that is if he climbs on a train in the town that he lives in, which is called Swindon, and he gets on a train from Swindon and travels to London. This is going to be really, really difficult for him, though, because he has, certain developmental challenges. He struggles having new experiences because, as I explained a couple of days ago, whenever he is in a new environment, he basically takes in all of the information coming at him. His brain doesn't edit anything out. It's very easy for him to be overwhelmed by what he sees, to have this informational overload, and for him then just to freeze and start breaking down, right? So this trip that he has to make from familiarity into the unknown becomes a big part of the story now. And I would characterize that also as, like I say, a coming-of-age novel. We also have a fancier word for that. This is a German word. If you speak Afrikaans, actually, you'll recognize the word there, Roman, which means novel. Bildung is the German word for education, but it can also mean development, the development of a person. So a Bildungsroman is a story that is about a young person's development, coming into adulthood, basically. And it's not necessarily education that does it. It's more like having a life experience that is challenging and difficult, and which actually happens outside the realm of the family and outside the realm of the school as institutions that shape us. It's more about a young person going away from those things out into the world, having dangerous adventures, being afraid, meeting people who help them or who threaten them, and learning to navigate the world as a place of adults, and in so doing, actually themselves becoming an adult as well, and journeying into this complex, hard world that doesn't actually really care about you, but which you have to find a way to be absorbed into in a kind of functional way. And that's another very well-known kind of novel. All kinds of books about this. I mean, you can say Harry Potter is actually like a coming-of-age story, as well as Harry grows from being a child to being an adult. Or Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte is another famous classic of that genre. It's also got letters in it, by the way, Jane Eyre. So it's also partly an epistolary novel. So this is what the story becomes, that we've kind of shed the detective thing. That's not going to be the story anymore. Rather, something else is going on here, which is that Christopher actually has to grow up. And he has to, despite the fact that we know he's got all of these difficulties, these developmental difficulties, he's got to find a way to grow up now, to become his own person. Throughout the book, he has been constantly surrounded by adults. His dad, his teachers at school, Siobhan, other people in the neighborhood, adults who keep an eye on him, watch him through the windows, sometimes invite him into the house and fuss over him, worry about him because they know he's different. Throughout the book, he's always being supervised and watched by adults. But he's also a growing boy. He's like 15, 16 years old. And it's at that time of anybody's life that you've got to find an existence outside of the adult world, right? Outside of adults constantly watching over you and telling you what to do. It's that point where you typically rebel, right? He might not know how to rebel, but here he has to break free. And his breaking free story is that he's going to get on a train from his town and go to London. And this journey is going to be really, really difficult for him to navigate, specifically him, because it's not just going to be a journey from a place to another place. It's also going to be this journey of self-discovery where he learns what he's actually capable of doing. And so for about like a whole lot of pages, for a whole lot of chapters, we are with Christopher as he gets on a train in Swindon and makes his way to London. And this journey is going to be really, really difficult for him for a number of reasons. I did just want to, I forgot to look at this quickly, but if you, I was going to mention it before I go to this train part, but if you look on page, this starts on about page 131 or so of my edition of the book anyway, so that's chapter 157. This is where we see the letters that his mother has written him, and that we get to read, I think, pretty much all of them. But as you read them, I think, again, it's this metafictional thing, this postmodern attitude that Haddon is bringing to bear on us, the reader here. Because one, you're aware suddenly of a text within a text, letters within a story, but you also get a sense of these letters as written documents, as something written by another human being. So if I look at page, this is where Christopher's mother is explaining to him why she needed to leave. On the bottom of page 134, we had a lot of arguments like that because I often thought I couldn't take any more. And your father is really patient, but I'm not. I get cross, and even though I don't mean to, and by the end we stopped talking to each other very much because we knew it would always end up in an argument, and it would go nowhere. And I felt really lonely. That was when I started spending lots of time with Roger. I mean, obviously, we had always spent lots of time with Roger and Eileen, but I started seeing Roger on his own because I could talk to him. He was the only person I could really talk to. When I was with him, I didn't feel lonely anymore. So she started a romantic relationship with him. One thing led to another, and soon she was leaving this family behind. Just one thing to pick up on there is if you have the book in your hands, you can see that there are a lot of spelling mistakes in the letters. She's spelling words incorrectly. like arguments, patient. Two, she writes T-O-O instead of T-O. She spells argument again incorrectly. So we have these letters which are kind of, in a way, authentic letters, because we can see that they're written by a kind of flawed, perhaps not all that very intelligent or well-educated woman, right? And this bringing attention to the text itself, the actual word, through spelling mistakes, kind of heightens your awareness as a reader of the text as being a text. And so it begins to just play around with your distinctions between what's true and what's made up, right? So he's always keeping you, in a sense, aware of the blurriness between truth and fiction, just introducing this added layer of complexity. So as the story progresses, it's starting to become more and more complex, rather than accelerating us towards a satisfying conclusion. This is what happened, this explains it. Rather, what he's doing is kind of making us ask, as a reader, more and more questions about the text. Why did he do this? Why does the writer include spelling mistakes? Why does the font change? Why are there all these diagrams and pictures? He's making us ask questions of the text and kind of inviting you as the reader to be a more active, engaged participant or creative force in the book itself. So instead of leading us towards an answer, what happened and why, he's leading us to more questions. Why are these people like this? What is the solution to their problem? Is there a solution to their problem? Is there any satisfying way to sort this mess of their lives out? And in truth, there isn't a way for them to sort it out. Things are not going to head in a kind of happy, nice direction, because life doesn't head in a nice, happy direction very often. Life is messy, and we very rarely bring to a neat, tidy conclusion the things that happen to us or the things that go wrong in our lives. They're always just kind of present and bubbling away under the surface, unresolved. It's kind of a miserablest way to look at things. But I think the book is actually quite pessimistic in that way, because, and this really struck me as I was reading this part of the book, is that Christopher, gets on the train. There's a lot of difficulty. This is a hard thing for him to do. And in case you are kind of unsure why, maybe it's worthwhile just explaining it a little bit here, that I had to explain to my class that, in South Africa, not all of you, I think, live in South Africa, but some of you will. Here in South Africa, we don't, have trains. We can't really get from one place to another on a train quickly and efficiently. In the UK, which is a much smaller land mass than South Africa, they have this rail network, and you can use trains to get from all these outlying little towns around London into the city of London. And it can be quite a jarring experience, because London is, as we learned from William Blake, a very bustling, packed, busy, maybe even dangerous, glamorous, huge city. Whereas Swindon, where Christopher's from, is going to be a kind of a sleepy little town, really. But you just take a train, and 2 or 3 hours later, you are in like a typical little quiet suburb that you would find anywhere in middle-class South Africa. And all of a sudden, you're in one of the biggest, most important cities in the world. So that is a head-spinning, kind of jarring juxtaposition that might not be used to if you just never do it. So for Christopher, he's got to really, really he's got to be like, he would be shocked by this whole experience, and he is. This journey that he takes is very hard and difficult for him, because he doesn't understand how to navigate the system, doesn't know how to use the trains. He encounters these people who sort of help him along the way, like a police officer, but actually Christopher, has to trick them into helping him. And that's kind of his growth into an adult, which is how to manipulate other people, how to, tell them little white lies and get his way with them. But once he's on the train, he doesn't actually know where he's going, if he's going in the right place, if he's in the right place, if he's going in the right direction. He doesn't really know what's going on in the maps, because he's also taking in all of this information all the time. He's kind of under experiencing this informational overload. And so this journey is really fraught, and it's kind of like it's like a hero's journey too, you know. It's filled with peril and danger, uncertainty, new experiences, threats. This is why I say the book is quite pessimistic, is that all the characters he encounters on this journey, on the train from Swindon to London, all these adults are just actually, by and large, pretty terrible to him. They treat him badly or indifferently. They don't really care about him. They don't seek to help him in a genuinely decent way. They are, in a sense, disappointing and often more dangerous than they are helpful. The sights, the sounds, the things he hears, the things he sees and smells on the train are just kind of alienating and awful. And there's the sense, like Mark Haddon, kind of a bit like maybe Roald Dahl, the famous British children's book writer, has this very dark vision of the adult world as being a place of like danger and disappointments and failure, right? So again, it's kind of more complex and difficult a story than was perhaps originally given to us in the beginning, where you almost feel as though you're reading a children's book, and that it's a kind of quirky, twee little detective story about a child solving a mystery. That is not what the book ends up becoming. It becomes a very kind of fairly dark and twisted, complicated story by the time we are heading towards the end, right? So this whole journey to him is very confusing for all those, very confusing and overwhelming to Christopher for all those reasons, I would say. If you look, say, on page 208 to 210, you can see here that Haddon's found yet another way to use interesting fonts, pictures, pictograms, diagrams on the page to try and represent what the big boards would look like in your typical British railway system, which gives you all the information, including advertising, times, dates, trains, and all that stuff, website addresses, kind of little logos for things. So again, you get the sense of the visual world of text kind of impinging on the traditional domain of the novel, which is words. And so you're always in the sense of, like, again, feeling that you're reading something very unconventional, right? Something very kind of strange and not exactly what it promises that we got at the beginning, like I said. And he eventually does get to London, and he makes his way, because he's got his mother's address from the letters. So he's able to find his way from the train station in London all by himself to his mother, and they reunite, and it's kind of emotional, and again has a certain expectation that you as a reader might have. Okay, this is the end of the story. Christopher has come of age, he's grown up, he's navigated this hero's journey, he's made it to his destination, he's overcome all the dangers, he's found his mother, and the scene where they embrace and hug each other, kind of like the prodigal son or something has returned home at last. That should be, in a way, the happy, conclusive end of the story, right? He's done it. He's achieved it. And that is what happens, except the story still has some time to go. Haddon's not going to end the story there. After the happy ending, there's still more life to live. There's still more story to tell. And so again, the story gets increasingly kind of more complicated, because Christopher is a complication for his mother all of a sudden. She's living in a little London flat with her boyfriend, Roger. They have very little money. They have no space for Christopher to stay there. And very soon, Christopher's behavioral tics begin to emerge, and his mother begins to freak out all over again. And she still can't deal with Christopher. She doesn't know how to do it. And Christopher's reappearance in her life leads to the breaking up of this new relationship of hers, leading to the only option that she has left in her life, which is that she's got to take Christopher back to Swindon, back to his father, and she herself has to stay in Swindon as well, but in a different house. So basically, the parents are now fully separated and essentially getting divorced. And Christopher, kind of by the end of the story, is, being passed around between them. And we don't have this happy ending at all. There are intimations of like a nice conclusion to the story, but actually his parents are not getting on at all. They don't quite know what to do with Christopher. We don't know what's going to happen to him either. Some good things happen. By the end, he's passed his maths at an A level. So he might be able to go to university one day. That fits with the coming of age thing again. He's changed through the course of the book. Christopher hasn't stayed the same. He has indeed grown up. He's not that little naive kid at the beginning. He's more of an adult by the end. And he might go to university. His parents buy him a dog of his own, a Labrador. I think it's got a Labrador or a Retriever anyway, called Sandy. So he's kind of got some responsibility. But I think what I'm kind of driving at the whole time here is that the story doesn't take us to a kind of happy, conclusive end. The story ends with more questions than it does answers, and it's kind of trying to show you that this thing of solving the mystery is just in a way a storytelling device. It's not how reality works. In a typical story, solving the mystery ends the story, or reuniting with your lost mother ends the story. But actually, that stuff is all just the beginning of a new story, which takes on the character of the problems you are pulling through from the previous story into this next one. And so your problems, in a sense, follow you around, and you're never really able to solve them. You can just live with them. The world is not so neat and tidy as happy endings and typical stories give us. And Haddon, throughout the whole story, throughout this whole novel, is always trying to undermine the notion of a typical story. He's always telling us basically that he's never gonna give us something satisfying, something that pretends all the problems were solved, people lived happily ever after as in a fairy tale, and we don't have to worry about them anymore. No, what he's saying is that the problems will just persist in a different way. And yes, the people in the stories change. Things happen to them. They turn into different people. But there's always this darker, more tumultuous truth about life, that it's unfortunately, a lot more complicated than a story. And yet, he's telling it to us in a story, right? So the only way he can effectively get that big theme across to us is by giving us a story that is aware of itself as being a story in the first place. And I think he does that very successfully throughout the novel, whether it's through playing around with the font, using different literary forms like a letter, putting pictures and pictograms into things where they shouldn't be. The end of the story, actually, the book ends kind of like actually on a kind of a nice little note. The last few lines, page 268, are, and I know I can do this because I went to London on my own and because I solved the mystery of who killed Wellington. And I found my mother and I was brave and I wrote a book, and that means I can do anything. So that's kind of a nice, hopeful note, I suppose, actually. But that isn't kind of the end of the book, because then we get this appendix. An appendix is another section of the book appended onto the end. And it's all of these mathematical problems that he solved throughout the course of the book. So in a way, the ending of the story is not the ending, but another ending is actually being suggested to us, as though no matter what, the story carries on, right? Christopher might well be saying that he believes he can do anything, but we kind of know that he's got all of these problems that aren't just going to go away. And the problems are actually not personal. They're not because of him, but it's actually because the adults in his life are such, useless people. His parents are kind of useless and don't properly take care of him. And they try their best, to be fair, but they themselves are damaged people, and they don't know what to do with this little boy they have in their life, or this teenage boy they've got in their life, and they never really will, right? And so this alternate ending we get, there's a kind of hint that things carry on, and we the reader don't get to see it, but in that participatory reader sense, we kind of get to imagine and infer that life carried on for these people in a whole new and still very difficult way. That's kind of what I get from the book anyway. So people might say, I've heard people say that and some of my students have said too, that in reading the book at the beginning, they thought it was maybe a book for children, and it felt like maybe a kid's book in a sense. And I actually agreed with them that it does feel that way, but I think it's deliberate. And it's Mark Haddon kind of throwing you a red herring of his own and saying, you think you are getting this standard formulaic thing, but actually I'm going to be giving you a hard dose of reality by the end of the story, and of an adult reality, not a reality we used to, not a story we used to comfort children with, but an adult reality that you have to realize as part of your own growing up. Okay, and I think that's what I really wanted to say about the book. Vleit Vleit, my story is 8. Got about 10 minutes left, so I don't know if you guys have any questions for me about the book or any of the other texts we've done about the POE. You're welcome to ask me now. I'll be online here for a couple minutes more. If not, I will be happy to send you on your way. Wishing you good luck for your exams, and a reminder, just to give yourself a break, to work hard a little bit each day on the work, on the POE. If you do just a little bit every day, you'll find that you won't stress out. The biggest mistake I see students make is that they leave themselves too much to do on the due date. If you do just a little bit every day between other things you're doing like jobs or raising families and so on, just a little bit every day gets you a long way, and certainly takes a lot of pressure off that due date. So a little bit every day will get you far, I think. So yeah, wish me luck for marking everything, because I've got a whole lot of marking to do that will be coming pretty soon. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here, but remain online in case you have any questions.